Welcome to the Speexx Exchange podcast with your host, Donald Taylor. As a renowned learning and development industry expert, as well as chairman of the Learning and Performance Institute, Donald sits down with experts from around the globe to talk business communication, learning technology, language, digital transformation, and engaging, upskilling, and reskilling your organization. This podcast is brought to you by Speexx, the first intelligent language learning platform for the digital workplace. Listen in and you might learn a thing or two.
Welcome to this episode of the Speexx Exchange podcast. I'm your host, Donald Taylor, and on this episode we have with us not one guest, but three: Simon Brown, Paul Ashcroft, and Garrett Jones. They're the authors of a new book, The Curious Advantage, published by Leakey. We'll have the route to that, the URL, in the notes. Please, gentlemen, can you introduce yourself? Simon.
Hi, Don. Thank you for having us. Thrilled to be here. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at Novartis. Novartis is a focused medicines company of 105,000 people based in Switzerland.
Thank you. Simon. Paul. Hi.
Hi, Don. Great to be here. So I'm Paul Ashcroft. I'm with Garrett, one of the co-founders of the Ludic Group. We are a digital transformation consultancy helping companies all over the world, including Novartis, make the shift to digital.
That's something which I know from talking with people, a lot of people are concerned about at the moment. So I'm guessing you're pretty busy. Garrett, good to have you with us.
Hi, thanks, Don. Yes, we have been busy through the lockdown, which has been pretty bittersweet, but I'm Paul's partner and co-author with Simon, as you know. If there's anything to add to what Paul said, is that I'm a musician, and I'm mostly compose and think of most things in terms of music.
Including digital transformation?
Including digital transformation. I can talk at length about sequencing and parallel processing and the composition process, which is not unlike the curiosity process, we think.
I can sense there may be something there, material for the future. But we are here together for a short amount of time with our guests listening to this podcast. Let's crack on with our view of curiosity, and particularly looking at curiosity in relationship to learning. Garrett, how would you define curiosity?
We think of curiosity as that specific state of being in a state of wonder and wonder if and wonder what. But more than that, it's also about doing and learning by doing. So this combination of I wonder what that's about and then going there and learning, for us, is what curiosity is all about. We think of it as kind of having an attitude of wonder and a spirit of exploration. It's where you learn and choose to do new things, maybe put yourself in uncomfortable positions and really take on new knowledge that expands your context and expands your awareness. It's a thing that kind of drives us and moves us forward. But for us, it's very practical. It's very based on not only wonder, but doing and learning.
Okay, so there's a lot in there. And by the way, if you're a non-native speaker of English, when we're talking about wonder here, it's W-O-N-D, not W-A-N-D. Very difficult to hear the difference if you're not a native speaker sometimes. We can wonder about things. We can also perhaps just notice something, though. So what's the difference between having that feeling of wonder and excitement, if you like, and just saying, oh yeah, that thing which was in one state yesterday is in a different state today? What's the difference there?
I think that, the big difference is that it's something you want to know about. There's this kind of motivation of, oh, hang on, this is something new, something I'm interested in, and there's a motivational aspect to it.
Right.
You focus on something. But there's also something around context. Just being surprised is about having yourself in a situation where something happens that you didn't expect. It's a little bit like when someone tells a joke. The punchline comes from somewhere you didn't expect and you're surprised. And surprise is great. It has a neurochemical impact on our brains. But the thing about wonder and being surprised is different from, as you say, just noticing something. And noticing, Wittgenstein, to be philosophical for a moment, said, that of which I have no language, I cannot speak. And the thing about noticing is you may not notice something if you don't have language for it. If you can be in a situation where lots is going on around you, but if perhaps a lab, for example, if you don't have the language of the lab, you won't be able to understand and decode what's happening. So you don't see it, and you won't be able to notice. Notice is maybe things on the periphery. I remember when I was studying and doing Aikido, the martial art, they taught us to be aware of the things behind us and to be aware of things around us. It sort of opened up our understanding and noticing of things that we may not have seen before. But the key thing about curiosity for us is that if you notice something, or it's something on the periphery or something you're interested in, you go there and you start to learn the language. And by language, I mean all kinds of language, physical language and contextual language and so on. So there is a big difference between just noticing, being surprised, and curiosity.
And you have that motivational side of it. And as you're suggesting, there's a not exactly a prerequisite, but the more that you are aware and have the language, the familiarity with the situation, the more likely you are to link that to wanting to know more about what's changed. Wittgenstein also said that light dawns slowly over the whole, which is very often my reaction when I'm having these conversations. I'll get it. I just need to take a bit of time. Simon, you're the Chief Learning Officer at Novartis. It's an organizational-wide initiative on, as I understand it, being more curious. Can you tell us, how does that work? And is that, it must be a delight as a Chief Learning Officer to have an organization to be so curious, but also quite a challenge. What have you been doing there?
Yeah, so I would say it's broader than an initiative. So about 2 years ago, we had a new Chief Exec, Vasnara Simon, take up the reins and refocus our culture around being inspired, curious, and unbossed. And so we're on a culture journey, which will span across many years, but it means curiosity is a key part of our culture. And so behind that, we've built out our learning offer to help our associates around the world to be more curious. And there's lots of different ways that we've done that, from providing access to great learning to making it easier for people to be able to interact and access learning, but also one of the big challenges that we heard from people was, I don't have time to learn and my manager doesn't support me in learning. So to try and tackle that one, we've actually set an aspiration around Novartis associates spending 5% of their time, or 100 hours a year, focused on their curiosity and their learning, whether that's formal or informal learning. And that's with the intention to try to, I guess, change that mindset around actually learning isn't something I need to do in my spare time or when everything else is done. Actually, the company really values learning, and we want people to spend time learning, because that's how we will have the skills that will make us successful in the future. It will create the space that people can ask questions and innovate and explore and experiment. And that's sort of behind why we're moving towards this culture of curiosity.
Novartis is a global pharmaceutical company. It's like all pharmaceutical companies, focused on research and development, and it's also, of course, constrained by a great amount of regulation. That doesn't sound like the natural place necessarily, perhaps the R&D bit, but not the regulatory side of it, sound like the natural place for curiosity. So why has that been such a priority?
Curiosity, to Garrett's definition at the beginning, is around asking the question, I wonder if, or I wonder how, and whether that's from discovering a medicine in the first place, and sure, which molecule is going to cure whichever disease that we're trying to focus on. Or then as you go through that drug development process, how do we get the right dose? How do we target it? How do we get it to the right part of the body? All of that is questions and exploration and experimentation to try to work through and understand how it's going to have the greatest impact. And then as you go through, how do we best get this to patients? You've got to be curious about what the patient experience is, and what the doctors need to know, how you package it up and how you manufacture it. You can apply curiosity through all of those steps. So rather than coming in with a very fixed view of it, and this is where it interacts with the other parts of our culture, having an unbossed around servant leadership. So the view that the idea comes out from the team. So you have a curious team with an unbossed leader who's encouraging people to speak up, to share ideas, to test things out. You end up with a much better solution than if you've got an environment where either the leader knows best or people aren't encouraged to be able to ask questions and explore and experiment and be curious.
It sounds absolutely right. If I was running a billion-dollar company, I think I'd be very nervous, though, about letting go of the control that I've been used to having. I'm not suggesting that your CEO is in that position, but it would be a risk. So hats off to Vasnara Simon for doing that.
Yeah, and I guess to your point, there are places where you can do that, and there are places where you can't do that. So to your point around regulation and operating procedures,
when we're producing a medicine, it needs to be produced following a process absolutely to the letter,
Sure.
so that you know that you get a safe product at the end of it. But you can still be curious within the context of that process. You can go to the process owner and you say, oh, I thought maybe we could do this and that will be more effective or whatever. So it's not about changing the way that you do things every time, but you can still be curious about it and think, is there a better way? And then go through the right channels in order to make sure that curiosity comes to light, and then you can experiment, etc. So it doesn't necessarily conflict with the regulatory operating procedure piece. It's just finding the right places and the right way in which to apply that curiosity.
That's really well explained, Simon. Thank you. And I'm well aware, as we all are, I think in pharmaceuticals, you've got these standard operating procedures for everything. They have to be there.
Yes.
But I love the idea that you can be curious within it, and provided the culture accepts it, then you can go on perhaps to change for the better. Paul, there's a model in the book, the 7 C's. And again, This is an audio. So when I say 7 C's, I mean the letter C, not the 7 SEAS, the 7 C's of curiosity. Paul, can you talk us very quickly through that, given that we've got the context, we've got the definition, we've got Simon describing what it's like actually having a curious organization. What are the 7 C's you've got, and how would you use those to help people get better at being curious?
Sure. So there's a curious story about how we came up with the 7 C's. when we talk to people and we say, what is curiosity, as you asked us today, almost everybody would have a definition of what curiosity is. But if you ask them, okay, so are you curious? Yes, I am curious. But then if you say to them, so are you any good at being curious? They say, what do you mean? I'm just curious. I can do that. Or they say to us, well, curiosity killed the cat, didn't it? So why would I even want to be curious? And it got us thinking as to, well, can you be better at curiosity? Is it something that you can work at, train, like you would train a muscle in the gym to be fitter and to be stronger? And we think we discovered the answer is yes, that there are perhaps not necessarily process steps, but there's certainly ingredients or elements that seem to be involved in being successfully curious. And so we came up with this idea. Well, as we explored it, there was some around, firstly, context, exploring the things around you, community, building a network of people that help you explore and learn together. And then curation. Curation's about focusing. If you think about a museum curator choosing what is going to be in their exhibition and what's going to be left out, it's a process of curation. Then we suddenly thought that, hang on, these things all seem to begin with the letter C. Can we continue this game? Okay, so what else is connected to curiosity? We had these 3 C's around context, community, curation, and we exploring further with what else is involved. What in our research, what did we discover? And we then were about, well, as you put it into action, as you bring it to life, this seems to be about creativity, ideating things, thinking new ideas. Construction is the next C, putting it into action. And then really importantly, criticality, because if you just continue down the same path without challenging yourself, you start to become a victim of your own bias, not going down new pathways, not exploring further. And then finally, I think Simon gave us this one, as I remember, confidence. So confidence is almost the most interesting, because does confidence come at the end? Does confidence come at the start of being curious? And in the end, we think that they're totally intertwined. You become more confident as you are more curious, but without confidence, it's almost impossible to start being curious. So you need the two together. So there's your 7 C's: context, community, curation, creativity, construction, criticality, and confidence. And as you say, there's a very nice metaphoric link to the 7 C's of the oceans around the world.
Thank you for that. Great. We've got the 7 C's of curiosity there that we can sail. You started the list, Paul, by talking about how you've asked people, are you curious and can you be better at it? And we tend to regard it as a binary state. You've got it or you haven't. But you suggested very strongly that you can get better at being curious. For adults, how do we do that?
So in lots of ways. We think you can use the 7 C's model, if you like, as a checklist for yourself. If you are thinking about exploring something new, I want to learn a new language, I want to travel to a new country, I want to get better at something, or even explore something I've never done so before. Where do you start in this? Now, my way will be, okay, I'm going to go and join a club. I'm going to go and meet with people that I have no idea how to do this, but they do. And by working with them and learning from them, I'll get better at it. It might just be, I'm going to make something and I'm going to find, I want to learn how to code something new. Okay, I'm just going to get in there, do some tutorials and try it. And one of the things that we talk about often is failure here. And the idea that one of the things that holds people back is the idea that if I try it, I might well fail. And particularly in the context of a large company such as Novartis or any other, often it's not seen as great to fail. Now, we know, and Simon's done a lot of work on this there, that organizations that don't see failure as failure, but as something to be celebrated and actually rewarded as part of their journey of being curious and discovering something new, recognizing things are going to go wrong, they're the ones that are more successful with it. And then that's about, as adults, just being open and being aware that if you try something new, you are going to fail. That's just part of the process. Do it in small ways. Garrett likes to talk about low impact, high frequency failure, lots of little failures rather than one big one where you land on your face and it hurts.
I think that's a really good example. I think for Novartis, you can imagine some spectacular failures which would be critical for the organization, but smaller ones you can live with. I'm just going to go to Garrett, and then perhaps we could get some views, Simon, from you in a second. Garrett, this idea of small failures where it's not catastrophic, but you learn from them on the way. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, low impact failure, high volume, high frequency, things where you're always doing things without looking to be successful, but just exploring and killing your darlings is one of the nice things. You stop the things immediately where you feel they're not leading down the route that you'd like them to achieve. And so it's a little bit like stabilizers on an airplane again, or stabilizers on a boat. They kind of flutter as they keep things stable, and that may have the same impact. All this little failure leads towards success. It's another way that missiles target. They fail, and as they triangulate towards their target, it's very similar. You fail until you succeed. One of the things we were talking about earlier, and about that awareness, there's a linkage to kind of failure and awareness, because failure allows you to know what you don't want to do and what you don't want to achieve, and you become aware of new things that you may or may not want to include in your journey of discovery. I was thinking when you were talking earlier about critical situations where you don't want things to be curious, like, for example, the cockpit of an airplane. You want your pilots to be deep in process and to be highly skilled, and you want them to be following process specifically because of health and safety and so on. But you also want your pilots to be curious and critically aware throughout the flight, because that curiosity will make them aware of things that may not be specifically on their radar. They may things in the periphery, things they may not have paid attention to that pop up, and so they become curious, and then they start to figure out what may be going on. So they're greater aware of their context, and sort of, as Paul was saying, it's like fitness. You can become more and more fit to be aware of other things that pop into your consciousness, and then you can ask questions and follow them through, which is why it's so linked to learning. The better you get at it, the better you get at learning, the better you get at asking questions. Again, that's why we threw in the idea of criticality, because you also don't want to just pursue the things that you like or pursue your biases. You want to be able to stop and really be critical of what you're learning and how you're moving forward.
That idea of low impact but high frequency failure sounds to me very much like the idea of loving the process, which is something which I think people have embraced in high performance in sports, where you get better by pushing yourself and testing yourself. But I'd like to come, Simon, to you and look at that idea of failure in a pharmaceutical company. It sounds like anathema. You wouldn't want to do it. And yet, if you're a curious organization, you have to have it. So how do you balance those two?
So it's an interesting one, because as an industry, pharmaceuticals failure is an inherent part of it, because not all drugs pass all the way through and come to market. There is more that will fail, if you like, along the way. However, actually reframing that actually it's not a failure, it's actually successful science that has discovered that this molecule doesn't actually treat the thing in the way that you needed it to. So there's a reframing piece there for starters. And one of the things we're trying to focus on is around psychological safety, and it's sort of part of the unbossed piece again, is creating the safety that people can experiment, try things and fail. And experimentation is not always successful by nature. If you're trying something new, if you're pushing the boundaries, you you will learn something at the end of that. And sometimes you're successful in learning that it works, but a lot of the times you're learning that it doesn't work. But then by repeating that, you can then iterate, try something different, and you'll end up in a much better place versus either not trying at all or trying a very safe way because you need to be seen to be successful at the end of it. So if you've created the safety that people can push the boundaries, then you will end up over the medium or longer term with a much better solution than taking the safe route because there wasn't an environment of being able to fail. And we have within the 7 C's, we have what we call the curiosity engine in the heart of it, which is around the process of creativity and construction. So the creativity is the what if, trying to ask a different question, explore something new. The construction is putting that into practice. And then you have the criticality to see what worked at the end of it. But if you go through that cycle, you're trying something new. Did it work? No. Okay. What if we try this? Did that work? No, but we learned something from it. Okay, what if we now do this? And it's almost a sort of agile development process. Yep. It's you come up with a minimum viable product, you test it, you iterate, and you pivot as needed as you go through it. So safety is a key part of that, and therefore the acceptance of failure is a key part of that.
You're talking there about curiosity in a way that absolutely shows us how coupled it is to learning, but it's learning from what could be regarded as mistakes or failures, but yes, otherwise just learning. It doesn't have to be, of course. You can be curious. Why is this? And somebody tells you, and there you are. You've learned something, and you are more receptive to learning because you were curious in the first place. That is something which I think is pretty well-founded. There may be subtleties behind it, but if we're curious, we're more receptive to the idea of learning something. Can you tell us any examples of how that's happened at Novartis that you noticed, Simon, that getting people into a curious state has just helped people adopt new ideas and be ready to learn, whereas in the past perhaps they might not have been?
Yeah, so I mean, we have a big focus over the last 2 years, and we're doing it again this year. We have a big focus around curiosity and what we call our Curiosity Month. So we actually have a whole month dedicated to curiosity, and we have it in September, so a month's time, and we'll have 170 plus virtual events throughout the company, virtual this year, and it's webinars, it's internal thought leaders, external thought leaders, influencers across the company, and sharing their ideas, sharing things that people can learn from across the company, and that will include things that are new, but also things we've learned from work that we've done. So it's really trying to create that space and environment that people can learn from each other, as well as learn from some of the sort of more structured formal catalogues of learning that we have, and providing that permission to learn by coming back to that sort of that space of the 5% of people's time to be able to dedicate and commit to learning.
Setting the atmosphere and the sense at work that learning is not something that's tolerated, but rather encouraged.
Exactly. And all the research around new skills coming, so a third of people having learned a new to world skill in the last 3 years, that 19% of the skills that we have today will be irrelevant in 3 years. All of this is leading both at an individual level, we need to be learning to keep ourselves current, but at an organization level, we need people to be focusing their time on building these latest skills and learning from each other in order to stay current.
Thank you, Simon. Garrett, can I just come back to you on this idea of the relationship between curiosity and learning? I mean, it's obviously something which is crucial to what you're doing. Can you tell us more about how you've seen that play out in other work that you're doing?
Yeah. So if you put curiosity rather than focus on learning, it's a little bit like, we love the quote by Saint-Exupéry from The Little Prince, where he said, if you want, if you want people to build a boat, don't command them to build a boat and get the wood and fashion a boat. Rather, teach them to yearn for the wonder of the deep blue sea and the ocean. And it's that idea of wonder as opposed to learning. So it's rather than something I have to do, it becomes something that I'm really wanting to do. And if you can build that into everything in the workplace, that sense of curiosity and wonder, you motivate everybody around you. The other thing, from a completely different perspective about this idea of curiosity and wonder, is what's happening in the digital age now. Now we're faced with an infinite amount of information. And the question is, everybody can get information from so many sources. What do we do with it, and how do we navigate that? And curiosity is a specific way of really taking us down routes and figuring things out and learning to achieve things using all that we have available to us because of the digital age. I mean, Josh Bersin talks a lot about learning in the flow of work, which I'm fascinated about. And we have a number of great examples from not only Novartis, but also people like IBM, organizations like IBM, organizations like Microsoft, who are really getting their heads around what is the technical infrastructure that can allow information to flow into the context of our everyday work in a way that is useful, in a way that is inspiring, and in a way that kind of allows us to succeed beyond our expectations in the moment in the workplace. And this idea of curiosity, I think, is much more about a mindset and an approach to data than it is simply about, I need to learn, or I need to get my learning hours in, or it becomes more rote learning. It really is about inspiration and wonder and driving things forward on the everyday.
Paul, I think Garrett has touched there on something very important I would like to wrap up with, which is the contrast between external and internal motivation for learning. External motivation, you have to do it. And sometimes actually you do have to learn stuff. You can't get around it. But by and large, when it comes back to Garrett's point of learning in the flow of work, which is very much au courant at the moment in the world of learning and development, learning in the flow of work has to rely on individual adult workers being curious and picking up on things and learning. The motivation there has to come internally rather than externally, because you cannot drive people to be curious about things. They have to experience it themselves from the inside. So, Paul, just give us the golden bullet here at the end, the nugget that's going to help us. How do we make sure that people are internally motivated? How do we create that atmosphere where they feel I can learn from these things, not just I can, but I want to, and I want to go out and see what's happening and how I can improve my work and my performance?
Yeah, I love this question, Don, because I'm going through exactly this with my 12-year-old son at the moment, that he's been studying the piano since he was 4. His mother's is a pianist, and he's now just got to that point. He's got pretty good at it, but he's now just got to the point where he's saying, I really don't want to practice. I really don't want to do it. So for the last 7 years, he's been, let's say, mostly externally motivated. And it's now just reaching that tipping point where if he doesn't become internally motivated, then probably he'll give up and stop. So what I suppose I've learned from seeing him do it is a few things. So one, I suppose, is about reward, that people feel that there's a close link, as we've shown sort of in the book, and I know it's demonstrated in other research, about how the brain responds to being curious. So the more curious you are, you receive the sort of the chemical hormone release in your brain that is equivalent to when you get reward, like if you're fed or you get a surprise. That's joyous in some way. So if the curiosity is linked to reward, then this is good practice for them. The point about psychological safety that Simon mentioned earlier, that if you can demonstrate to people and they can demonstrate to themselves that they can give it a go, and they may not get it right, but that's okay, and that they will continue down the path, and they may even make slightly bigger mistakes, and that's still okay. And that reinforcing of psychological safety, I think it's not a one-off. It's something you have to keep doing. And, just like that wonderful work by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi around flow, that as you get more into your curious journey, so you may see greater challenges and put yourself at greater risk. And so that just needs to be continually reinforced, that psychological zone of safety. And I think the final thing I would add to that is around curation, that in our digital world, we're so overwhelmed with information that technology could be a great help, but it also could be a hindrance. That if I go online and search for something, I might have 43 million responses to my inquiry, which isn't really a good place to start. And of course, there's great tools out there helping us sort through all that, whether it's learning or the TV we watch. But I think helping people put around them the relevant stuff, the relevant information, the relevant and right people helps them continue on that journey as well. So I think they would be my 3 things about linking to reward and continual reward, reinforcing psychological safety, and then just continually helping to curate. So as you get more into the topic, so the information connects and reveals itself, so you can go further.
Brilliant. I love that. And I think those 3 things together, creating the culture of it, helps build the individual confidence, which of course is one of your 7 C's. We're going to have to wrap up very shortly. The final question we always ask everyone on the Speexx Exchange podcast is, what are you curious about right now? Let's go in reverse order. Let's start with Simon. What are you curious about right now? Don't say curiosity, because then we'll have to start the whole podcast over again. What are you curious about, Simon?
So AI and skills is the piece that I'm very curious about, the role that will play in the future.
Yeah, I share that curiosity. I don't know where it's going to go, but Simon, we'll share the journey together and find out. Paul, what are you curious about right now?
So I'm going to say, having just experienced homeschooling through lockdown, I'm really curious about where that's going to go. So our world has taken a massive leap into digital. Everybody, including my own great-grandmother, now can use Zoom. So as we now do that and reintegrate ourselves physically and with each other socially, I think there's going to be a lot we bring forward from this digital experience that we've all had. So I think that's my current curious experiment, is where are we going with this sort of digital physical world in the future?
It's not going back, is it? That's for sure. Finally, Garrett, what are you curious about right now?
I'm curious right now about Chopin and Chopin's piano, because during lockdown, I brushed up quite a lot of my Chopin when I was needing to motivate myself. But the Chopin's piano, his lover, George Sand, took him onto Mallorca, and there wasn't a decent piano there. And they sent around all of Europe, and an amazing piano was sent on the back of a truck. Well, it was a horse-drawn wagon to Mallorca, and on it he composed, in this monastery, his 24 preludes, which are just some of the most brilliant piano work ever composed. And that piano then was left on the island and remained there. And there's this incredible story of this piano and how it went around the world, and then it was in some kind of dust heap, and somebody found it. And I'm fascinated about the relationship between context and pianos, and how it was that he was able to compose these particular preludes in that place. And it's all about Chopin's piano for me at the moment.
Isn't there a prelude he wrote to do with rain that he wrote?
Yes, there is.
Yeah,
yes, there is.
It was stimulated by him.
Absolutely.
That's my own curious mind. I had these snippets. My mother called me a snap